Hello and welcome to this week's Makar to Makar. It's great to be back in my very own living room again. I hope you're back in yours. If this is your very first time to Makar, a special welcome to you. And if you visited the programme more than once, an even warmer welcome to you. Tonight, for the very first time, we have a triple-decker Makar. We've got three fantastic young poets on the programme tonight, in the form of Ella Duffy, Raymond Antrobus, and Jay Bernard. I'm going to introduce them all properly in a moment. Well, the idea behind Makar to Makar is to pass the baton on, Makar to Makar, maker to maker, the nearest English equivalent of the word Makar. The word Makar just means National Poet of Scotland, and for the moment, that's me. But the word Makar wasn't always used to define or describe bards or exclusively Scottish poets. Chaucer was once referred to as a Makar by Dunbar. And we love also the idea in this programme of passing the baton on within the programme itself between poetry and song, so as we have a rich and heady mix of both the forms and a conversation between the two. So to kick things off, I'm going to start with this poem of mine, Donkey. Us two hee-hawing to ourselves out in the cobbles when the moon slipped like a girl across the sky and the shining stars were apples or potatoes. Us two snorting and stamping and slapping up a love when the day broke across our bare backs and steam flared from our wide nostrils. Us two stamped out that bright, cold January day, slapped the knackered wood door down and galloped like stories across the green grass, and we couldn't stop ourselves. Us two biting, kicking, swinging our big fat asses, sinking our glad hooves into the soft grasses. Us two going like this, hee-haw, hee-haw, hee-hee, until they came for us. They did, so they bloody did. Put us back in the yard, cobbled, cold, to grow old. But oh, yes, it was worth every blade of grass, every fresh mouth of pure air, every singing tree. Us two would never have not, would we, broke out, scot-free. Well, that's my wee opening offering for this week. And now I'd really love to welcome into the Zoom room Ella Duffy, Raymond Antrobus, Jay Bernard, and Claire Brown.
Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Hey.
Wonderful to see you. Hi, wonderful to see you all here. Fantastic to see you. Really looking forward to this. I was thinking of actually what connects you three poets, and you're all really interested in history and in mythology and in transformations, really, and translations, if you like, between one thing and another, between one being, one form and another. And you're all very experimental with the form itself. So the reason I picked all three of you together is because your poetry excites and delights me, and because also there is a real rich conversation to be had between all three of your poetry. Ella Duffy is going to begin tonight's glorious reading. Ella's book, New Hunger, came out with Smith Doorstep earlier. It's had wonderful praise. It's sold out. It's now in its second run. Ella, like Raymond, is a student of the really fantastic Goldsmiths College. She's won a number of different prizes, including the Foyle Young Poets Prize a few years ago now, wasn't it, Ella?
Quite a few years ago now.
Yeah.
How many, maybe.
so welcome to Makar, and you're going to kick us off with a really rich selection of your poetry that gives us a real sense, really, of who you are. How did you find putting the selection together?
Yeah, it was funny. It was the first time I'd ever sort of put all my poems in one big go together, and it's funny how you notice the themes that run through them all, and how they overlap with each other. So it was quite a task putting it together, I think, because you think, oh, I need to sort of space out certain themes, and yeah, but it was a lot of fun.
Did you
Yeah.
find it fun putting yours together, Ray?
Fun would be one way to put it. I guess there was like an element of fun to it, but it was also terrifying and stressful. And I felt lucky that I was also working with an editor on bits of it. So it was kind of like a splurge of stuff. And I had Tom Shivers at Pen in the Margins, who was able to say, oh, here's a conversation actually that some of your poems are having. But yeah, I mean, obviously it was fun writing the individual poems, but then when you have the task of bringing everything together for a book, that can be daunting.
Yeah, because there's a strange kind of responsibility, isn't there? Writing poems is one thing, but actually deciding what you're going to read at any particular event, and particularly at an event like this is kind of half new age, where you've got an audience in front of you somewhere. We hope you're out there somewhere, but we have to imagine you, and at the same time not feel totally deluded. So how did you find that, Jay?
Luckily, I've been writing a lot of stuff and trying to sort of not worry too much about a particular theme or a particular idea or the length. Do you know what I mean? You know, sometimes you get really caught up with making a poem, you know. And so I've spent a little while sort of just trying to like write what I kind of think and feel. So actually this has been a really nice opportunity to read two kind of new sort of drafts actually that I'm still trying to sort of like pinpoint what they kind of really are. And I'm trying to see that as a happy, fun experience as opposed to a terrifying sort of roller coaster of emotions.
Great. Well, I just thought it'd be lovely actually to hear from the three of you, and also to say hello to Claire Brown, who's back this week, our wonderful rotating singer every week on Makar to Makar. We have three different singers: Suzanne Bonner, Catherine Philpott, and Claire Brown. And Claire's here tonight to respond to your poems in very different ways, which will be wonderful. I'm looking forward to that. Hello, Claire. Looking forward to that a little bit later on. Great. But for now, Ella, it'd be really wonderful to hear your set.
Yeah, of course. So I'm gonna kick it off with this poem. If I can find it, there it is. Called Chill. Medusa runs a bath, so hot it flays the scales from her skin. Soft, briefly more woman than beast. She wanders the house to suck the stony fingers of her men. One on the bed, one with his glass raised to his lips, one in the hall, gifted with grey flowers. Her memories spit and hiss. Loneliness is intimacy told backwards. She tongues their marble chests like a graveyard dog. And this next poem is called 15, which maybe I should say before is the tarot card number for the devil, another dark one. 15. A tarot reader told me I had the spirit of the devil, that my partner should sleep below a bag of boiled oats, having nailed the heart of a beetroot to bleed down the door of our flat. Fasting would starve it out, she said, but in those empty weeks, I envied the dead, till a pain in my gums shucked the front teeth from my mouth, and a tongue horsewhipped into the room. My breath was a tannery. How could I kiss her? My lover came with ice for the sweats, calm somehow, even as my lower back opened to mud, and a tail probed its muscle towards the light. The air was nettle. Arms, grew the medieval weight of a hoof. From each pore, a thorn. My body bristled, a clove-studded ham. I wouldn't be touched. My eyes sunk in and back, popped through the skull like peeled fruits. There would be no tears. sightless, my sense of smell urgent as a horny stray, I welcomed new hunger. And this next poem, the relatively shorter one, called Faith. When you said, would you rather I believed in God or ghosts, you were really asking if it were possible to carry on if one of us believed in something the other couldn't. How lack of the same faith could be a religion for new lovers in those quiet, hot weeks spent in bars between sheets. So I paused and prayed at your lips, our breaths ghosting on my words. Neither, I said, both. And this next one is called Salt, another one-word title. And I suppose this poem is very loosely based on the story of Lot's wife. And I suppose I'll let the poem speak for itself. Salt. As a child, she learnt the taste of hurt, brine stored under sight, and later, the comfort of fish with olives, its coastal tang. She would seek its scent on the skin of a lover, tongue for it, or when it was spilt, superstitious, throw it over her shoulder. She knew too many who had lost everything to rotten cities, so they never looked back. But when she turned, saw her own city hot and broken, she lost herself, mistranslated to salt. And this next poem is called Auroboros. And I wrote it after seeing the ancient symbol of an Ouroboros, which is a snake eating its own tail, and found it quite a disturbing image, I suppose, and thought about how I could turn it from its actual meaning into something maybe more personal. So yeah, I'll read this. Ouroboros. Think of this as hibernation, learning to last on the body's own larder of fat, like an adder overwintering, waking only to shed the layers of skin it no longer wants or needs. You begin to mistake hunger for thirst, sate the ache in your gut with citrus tea, mugs of ice. The punnet of grapes bruised by your bed are still life. Starving, you take your feet or tail between your teeth and swallow. Ouroboros, viper, faster, feasting on muscle and bone. You vanish into yourself, a wraith now, wreath. So for this next poem, I thought I would read one that's not in the book. And it's one that I was commissioned to write for a podcast called The Thunder Matters, which was looking for poems that were responding to John Clare's poetry. And I didn't really know much about John Clare's work, so this was quite an exciting / daunting project. But I found lots of poems by Clare about various different types of nests, birds' nests or mice, and I thought I'd write my own. So this was, I suppose, quite early on in lockdown, my first poem. I was getting used to our new life. Starlings Nesting. There will always be starlings in the roof, but here's a tree hollow, wrecked with shell. If the cat could pour itself through, one paw before the other's damage, this would be a different spring. Not the poplars, curling sound of mothers, hatchlings, grey and pink and grotesque, will grow out of need, leave their nests to the ants, shifting threads of worm to their own haunts. This is the spring we came home and stayed. And I think I'm going to end with a poem called Halves. I think this will appear a little later on, so I won't talk too much about it. Halves. When the sea had me by the waist, I cupped my hands between my legs and pushed out my daughter. She could not know then, as I licked the caul from her scalp, that men would rate her as rare leather. Boats sag their bellies of netting to skin which might sieve a woman. The way her father had angled me from my pod, turned me out of fur to boast a girl. I carried my child as a stone, could never have seen us now, mother and pup, the two halves of a mussel shell, dipping the shy grey of our backs under foam and back into rumour. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful, Ella. I really love those poems, the way that they play around with the idea of mythology and the way that you manage to make them sort of seem timeless in a way. They come from another time and yet they feel very much rooted in today, in now. And it seems to me an extraordinary kind of feat that you perform that you manage to translate the past into the present so effortlessly.
Oh, thank you. That's, well, yeah, I suppose it's a sort of happy accident, I think, when if they feel quite current. I suppose I don't tend to sit down and think I'm going to write a contemporary retelling of the Medusa myth. I think it's that thing of when you're writing from your own experiences, which are contemporary, it sort of seeps into the poem. But I do like writing without a sense of time. I think I find that quite exciting. So starting a poem and not thinking when is that set, I find that more freeing, I suppose. And I suppose it's writing within the space between the now and the past is quite an exciting thing to do as a writer, I find.
Yeah, because that space between now and the past seems very vivid in your poems. Like a line like "Loneliness is intimacy told backwards" could really resonate with today in these particular lockdown times where people are feeling isolated and lonely, and intimacy is something that is, you know, is a struggle to find, and yet the very act of writing is an intimate act in itself. Do you find that you think about intimacy and loneliness and themes as well when you're writing, or do these themes just kind of emerge almost by accident as well?
Well, I think the loneliness / intimacy thing is quite does come into my poetry quite a lot. I think they're not as far apart as we might think they are. That idea that maybe we use intimacy to measure loneliness, so they're sort of weighing against each other. So I find that the tensions and the sort of pull and push between quite big ideas quite fun to play with. But definitely I suppose reading the Medusa poem during this time, it does add a sort of because I wrote it maybe definitely over a year ago, so I wasn't thinking about how relevant it might be to now. Slightly terrifying. But in terms of themes, I think they just, whatever is interesting me at the time. think that was what, as I was saying, trying to say at the beginning, when you're putting your poems together into a collection and you don't necessarily spot the themes as you're writing the poems, it's only afterwards that you think, oh, I write about that quite a lot. I think.
Yeah, because you seem to write about the body and the natural world and the body through time in all sorts of different ways, from sucking stone fingers to to other transformations of the body, and the intimate sense really that you get of how the body fits into the human landscape and into the natural world runs through your work as a very rich theme.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think I've noticed that I tend to write about the natural world in a very similar way to the way I write about the body. I think it's because I just think of them as two, they're just two living things. And there's something quite satisfying about writing about something that's alive, whether it's a plant or fingers. There's something satisfying about using the five senses and getting really up close with something that's living and breathing. And I think that's, I mean, maybe it's because I fear the abstract a little bit, and feel much more grounded when I'm writing about something that's concrete. I think.
Yeah, that lovely poem, Faith, when it's kind of at the beginning of a relationship and you're exploring each other's belief systems, almost afraid to find out what they are in case they mean that your relationship won't be a goer. And, and there's that lovely line at the end of it, neither, both, and you get a real sense that at the beginning of a relationship we try, don't we, to fit in to each other in different ways.
And that compromise is such a thing. And I suppose I like, I think with a lot of my poems I sort of avoid set endings. I quite like them to be open, and that it's only the first chapter of a story, and that idea of neither, both sort of opens it up. I think I quite like endings not being completely resolved. Quite an exciting thing to play with.
Yeah, and that brings me on to the last poem that you read, Halves, where the ending isn't completely resolved either, but you actually give that the characters in that poem the kindness of a different kind of a story, a different kind of narrative story to the usual Selkie story, which can be a tragedy. It can be very, very, very sad. And at this point, I'd just like to welcome Claire Brown back into the Zoom room, because Claire's picked a song especially in response to that poem of your Halves, Ella. So Claire, tell us a wee bit about the song and why you picked it.
It's in response to Halves, Ella, and it's the story of a Selkie and that sort of shape-shifting quality, and a woman. It's called The Great Selkie of Sulskerry, and it's a woman who has a child and she doesn't know who the father is, and then the father appears, and the father is, you'll find out, is as a Selkie. But it's yikes. That, but it's really, yikes, because it's so dark. It's so it leaves such a sort of sad taste for the woman in question. And I mean, you'll hear the story, but it's just we don't know the reason why he's picked her, if they've met before, anything like that. But the future's all laid out ahead of her, and that feels very, very tragic and unmanageable in many, many ways.
I'm excited to hear. Is excited the right word? Maybe it's not.
Be excited. It's just I feel for the women so much, and a lot of people feel for the man in many ways, the Selkie in many ways. But I just feel for these women in these stories so much.
What did you feel for when you? Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
You go ahead, Ella.
Oh, no, I was just going to say off that the stories are pretty grim, and the women are treated appallingly, and often violently. So
sorry.
Oh yeah, well, I suppose for being I suppose when you have a story like that as a writer trying to sort of reinvent it in a way, it's quite liberating to give those characters more of a chance.
Yeah. It's funny what you said about the how the themes sort of present themselves without you necessarily knowing that they're there. When I'm searching for songs, I keep coming back to kind of the same things. It's just this that women really don't come off very well in folk songs, and but I want to defend that, and I want to I want to face that and be very present with that, and that for me makes them feel quite powerful in their own way. And the great thing about myths and old stories is that you can go, well, what if it was this way, and that's what was so wonderful about your poems, the Medusa one as well. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, take it away, Clara. We're dying to hear this song.
An earthly nurse sits and sings, and she sings by lily way. Say little can I, my bairn's father, far less the land that he bides in. Then he was there at her bed foot, and a grumbly guest, I'm sure was he, saying, here am I, thy bairn's father, although I be not comely. I am a man upon the land, and I am a silky on the sea, and when I'm far from land. My home it is in Salford. 'Tis not well, the maiden cried. 'Tis not well, alas, cried she, that the great Silky from Salford should have come and brought a bairn to me. Then he has taken a purse of gold, and he has laid it on her knee, saying, give to me my bonny wee son, and take me up thy nurse's fee. And it shall come to pass on a summer's day, when the sun shines hot on every stone, that I shall take my bonny wee son and teach him for to swim the foam. And thou shalt marry a proud gunner, and a proud gunner I'm sure he'll be, and the very first shot that e'er he'll shoot, he'll kill both my young son and me. Alas, alas, the maiden cried, the sweetie fate's been laid for me. And then she said, I'll bury me in Scary.
Wow, that's fantastic, that song. So fantastic. I love the narrative, the story that's in there. It just makes you see the whole thing, see the whole thing in pictures. What did you make of it, Ella?
At the haunting. Yeah, it's such a beautiful song, but yeah, incredibly sinister. It sort of tricks you in its sort of lullaby, and then you think, oh God, which is what I suppose Selkie folklore is. But yeah,
exactly. There's always a kind of a twist and an echo in the Selkie folklore that takes you back and brings you back and forth from the sea to the land, and also where you're constantly thinking of the in between, the land between the sea and the land, if there is such a thing, the kind of that strange nowhere land, and it makes you think deeply about belonging. So this seems to me a great moment to bring Raymond Antrobus back into the room. Raymond's poems make you think also about echoes and belongings, and they make you think about translations from the spoken word into the understood word, and make you think of all the different ways in which we understand language in the body and language outside of the body, and in the way that fits kind of perfectly with that song. And in your first poem that you're going to read, Raymond, you get a sense of the sea and sea water, and you play around a lot with sound and imagery in your work. And the Perseverance won the Ted Hughes Award last year, and it was also the Guardian Poetry Book of the Year. It's been a huge sensation, and people have been so excited about your work, because you seemed a fresh voice and seem to be doing something very differently in the way that Ella's doing something differently with mythology and the body and the past and the present. You two are doing something very differently with language, with deafness, with understanding and coming to terms with yourself from a child into the man you are now. So welcome to Makar, Raymond Antrobus. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm gonna read this first poem, which is called Echo, and it's the beginning of the Perseverance. And I'm going to close this window. There you go. And
exciting! We've never had a window closed on Makar to Makar before.
Exclusive. And yeah, so the way that the Perseverance kind of began, you asked me earlier about how you bringing together a book. I thought that when this book all came together that I was just collecting all the poems that were written from the point when a doctor told me that my dad was about to die to the point when he died, and the intense kind of grieving process which followed. Oh. Wow, that hit me just saying that again today. Okay, all right, hold up. I just need to sit with that a minute. Sorry, it was my dad's birthday last week, so it hit me. Okay.
Yeah, that's hard. Okay, it's hard. I mean, grief is like a slap in the face, isn't it? You just keep getting punched in the gut or slapped in the face, and sometimes at least you least expect it, and it's just one of those things that you turn around a corner and there you are, hit by it afresh.
Yeah. Okay. So I was in Barcelona, and I'd gone there to kind of find a way to make sense of everything that had happened. And I end up in Gaudi's cathedral, and I'm taking Gaudi's the audio guide in Gaudi's cathedral, and I'm stood underneath a particular roof, and the audio guide tells you to shout or sing and just be vigilant of how sound moves in this space, and to be vigilant of that, and how sound is the kind of access to God and the divine. And I was wondering, as a deaf person, as a hard of hearing person, if deaf people are included in this idea of divinity, if a way to access it, or one of the ways to access it, is through sound. And that kind of spurred off the sequence that the Perseverance opens on. I'm also the grandson of preachers, so that's also one of the reasons for this kind of Milton-esque-ness in these poems, and why they're kind of pillars. I'll show you how they look on the page, and I'll read them that way. Echo. My ear amps whistle as if singing to echo, goddess of noise, the ravelled knot of tongues, of blaring birds, consonant crumbs, of dull doorbells, sounds swamped in my misty hearing aid tubes. Gaudi believed in holy sound and built a cathedral to contain it, pulling hearing men from their knees as though deafness is a kind of atheism. Who would turn down God? Even though I have not heard the golden decibel of angels, I have been living in a noiseless palace where the doorbell is pulsating light, and I am able to answer. What? A word that keeps looking in mirrors in love with its own volume. What? I am a one-word question, a one-man patience test. What? What language would we speak without ears? What? Is paradise a world where I hear everything? What? How will my brain know what to hold if it has too many arms? The day I clear out my dead father's flat, I throw away boxes of molding LPs, Garvey, Malcolm X, Mandela, speeches on vinyl. I find a TDK cassette tape on the shelf. The smudged green label reads Raymond speaking. I play the tape in his vintage cassette player and hear my 2-year-old voice chanting my name, Antrob, and Dad's laughter crackling in the background, not knowing I couldn't hear the word bus and wouldn't until I got my hearing aids. Now I sit here listening to the space of deafness. Antrob, Antrob, Antrob. And if you don't catch nothing, then something wrong with your ears. They've been tuned to the wrong frequency. Camilla. So maybe I belong to the universe underwater, where all songs are smeared wailings for Salacia, goddess of salt water, healer of infected ears, which is what the doctor thought I had, since deafness did not run in the family but came from nowhere. So they syringed olive oil and salt water, and we all waited to see what would come out. And no one knew what I was missing until a doctor gave me a handful of Lego and said to put a brick on the table every time I heard a sound. After the test, I still held enough bricks in my hand to build a house and call it my sanctuary. Call it the reason I sat in saintly silence during my grandfather's sermons when he preached the good news I only heard as Babylon's babbling echoes. Gee. And the next poem I'm going to read a couple new poems actually. Yeah, I'm in the middle of a really long and tedious immigration case to bring my wife, her name is Tabitha, to the UK. And while we've been apart, like I haven't seen her since February, but while we've been apart, I've been kind of writing about our relationship and how we relate to each other. She is an art conservator, and so I am very inspired by her way of seeing things and painting and art, but also just generally. But this is a poem I wrote after we went to the historic New Orleans collection when we were over there and we came across a painting by a man who happened to be called John Antrobus. And I did some research about whether or not I may be related to this John Antrobus, and the jury is actually still out on it. So here's this poem. It's called Plantation Paint. And I'm just going to share the poem with you so you can see it on the screen. Plantation Paint. After Plantation Paint in the historic New Orleans collection, 1860, on canvas by John Antrobus. Tabitha, the art conservator, squints at the color, tells me the paint depicting the black of these men huddled for a burial will decay before the cypress trees surrounding them. There are several kinds of black, she says, and the details question my way of seeing. I wonder what kind of black would mark me. I am not the paint made from vine twigs or burnt shells. I am not a lamp full of oil. Tabitha, tell me how you'd paint me. Tell me if I'm closer to the white painter with my name than I am to the black preacher, his hands to the sky, widening the mahogany rot of heaven. Sorry, but you know by now that I can't mention trees without every shade of my family appearing and disappearing. And if you want to have a look at, I can show you the painting because it's online. It's quite an intense painting, but it looks like, I'll show it to you. It looks like this, and so you can see the preacher with his hand to the sky and the burial is happening. And a really interesting composition of light. So I'll read the next poem, which is called Cousin John. I wrote this poem on the run-up to the second referendum, and I knew that there were going to be people in my family who weren't going to vote the same way in which I was going to vote. And I wanted to do something with the feeling of that. So this poem is called For Cousin John, and I'll share the screen with you. For Cousin John. Land of Shade, William Blake. Your voice, a red and white flag, a tea time tablecloth. Slavery happened long ago, it means nothing now. I prepare silence, practice each time for a calm dinner, but you lift a fork, unsettle the territory. I can't stop seeing the child pulled from a home of hissing and raised by our grandmother who was endlessly scraping plates between us. With her gone, something shifts at our table, and you keep sharpening the somewhere else in me. Now, I don't know what it's like to live in a small military town or how you fit where everyone is white. Do you hold up England by its glit edges, best china handles? What secretly stirs your tea, cousin? We all alone in these streets. I wish you a surprise party of sober mothers holding Thomas a tank engine birthday cake. I wish you glistening grapes and radiated rooms. I wish you horses in rain and fields of broken gates. When we stood shoulder to shoulder at our grandmother's funeral, I didn't hear you cry, but I felt your quivering, saw your red face, the fallen flags in your eyes, cousin. Why couldn't you let us see what you were burying, cousin? I wish sunlight on all your fields. And I'm going to read one more. So these are new poems, so I have no idea the kind of anxiety of trying out new stuff. There's a Perseverance is a book which is very much kind of came to be because of the live experience, because of being able to share so much of the poems as they were being written with audiences. So this is we're in a different time now. So I'm going to go back, in fact, to the Perseverance and finish there. And I'm ending on the last poem in the Perseverance because it's the poem about where language begins for me, and one of the one of my kind of roots of language is children's picture books. And my dad used to read me this picture book called Happy Birthday Moon. And my being deaf, my parents didn't figure that out until I was around 7. So I was read these books without my parents knowing that. But my dad used to hold me on his chest, and he had a very deep physical kind of voice. And so the movement and feeling of these stories would live with me. I still remember them quite viscerally. And this story tells the kind of tale of a bear who's out in the woods, and every night goes up to the through the forest, up to the hill, up to the mountains, and looks up at the moon. And then this one particular day, the bear looks up at the moon and says, "It's my birthday." And the bear's voice echoes through the valleys, through the forests, through the hills, and he hears his voice come back to him. "It's my birthday." And then the moon says, "Wow." The bear says, "Wow, it's the moon's birthday as well." And so this whole conversation between a bear and the moon begins. And in this case, this is how this experience is where the poem comes from. Happy Birthday Moon. Dad reads aloud. I follow his finger across the page. Sometimes his finger moves past words tracing white space. He makes the moon say something new every night to his deaf son who slurs his speech. Sometimes his finger moves past words tracing white space. Tonight gives the moon my name, but I can't say it. His deaf son who slurs his speech. Dad taps the page, says, "Try again." Tonight gives the moon my name, but I can't say it. I say, "Raynan Akabok." He laughs. Dad taps the page, says, "Try again." But I like making him laugh. I say my mistake again. I say, "Raynan Akabok." He laughs, says, "Raymond, you're something else." I like making him laugh. I say my mistake again. Raynan Akabok. What else will help us? He says, "Raymond, there's something else. I'd like to be the moon, the bear, even the rain. Raynan Akabok. What else will help us hear each other, really hear each other? I'd like to be the moon, the bear, even the rain. Dad makes the moon say something new every night, and we hear each other, really hear each other. As Dad reads aloud, I follow his finger across the page. We made it to the end. Thank you.
You did. You made it to the end, and that was really fantastic. Terribly moving, that last poem and the first poem, and they move around in a kind of a circle. One poem echoes the other. You get a different kind of an end to the beginning of that other story, and so they seem perfectly placed as the first and the last poem in the perseverance.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And again, it was kind of a thing where it wasn't really done consciously. So much of the experience of writing that book was just kind of leaning into what felt necessary and what felt useful to me to understand and articulate and ground myself. And also it's a book which is very much about voice. It's voices beyond me, voices from history. People are trying to speak, and people haven't been able to speak, and not being able to speak and therefore be heard. And one of the main poetics of the book is the use of repetition. There's repetition throughout a lot of the poems in there, and that's kind of ties into the experience of being a deaf person in a hearing world where it's constantly repeat, and these are things which I only fully understood once I'd written the book, and then started again, reading the book to people and hearing the responses and feeling the responses. So this is quite, it's such a huge privilege to write something and to be heard in this way. And you know, I don't say that lightly. I'm really grateful for this, you know, to be able to do this.
Well, that's a lovely thing to say. But I was thinking about that, the technique of repetitions and how much that linked to being deaf, and that's the whole business of repeating and having things repeated back, and the sense of echo. But in the portrait that you get of your dad, and both of those two kind of bookend poems, you get an extraordinary sense. That you said earlier that your parents didn't understand that you were deaf till you were 7, and I was wondering if, when you actually started to write these poems, if you had memories come in that were pre-7, if you had a very different sense of yourself before 7 to after 7, because 7 is the age psychologists say where we understand certain things. Like, apparently you can only actually understand properly the word adoption when you're 7, and before that, even if the word's said to you, you technically won't be able to handle the concept of it. And it kind of interests me as a magical age number to start to understand something, to start to kind of piece yourself together.
It is. That is so true. It is a kind of magic number. I mean, you know, looking at you know, my qualification, you know, you mentioned Goldsmiths earlier. Like, I was at Goldsmiths primarily studying emotional literacy, primarily looking at what the benefits are of writing truthful, autobiographically, you know, about our lives and experiences in a classroom setting, and what the usefulness of that is therapeutically, and if, you know, art in that sense has a place in our education system. And the conclusion was, there is so many, you know, research going back to the 50s that have been demonstrating how useful and important this work is, to be able to, you know, go into classrooms and think about different emotions, and how that we really are failed in our education when it comes to emotional literacy, which is a way to articulate and understand our emotions as we feel them. We feel up to 30 emotions in one go, whereas most people would say that we feel between 2 to 4. 30 emotions, right? So the 7 is a magic number that I heard as well, because a lot of deaf students are kind of, you know, it's a kind of common thing with, we struggle with reading and writing. I was diagnosed as dyslexic with learning difficulties and all these other things that happened, and then they figured out I was deaf, and then they've kind of changed my pathology and the way that I was understood. How did I understand myself before I was 7? I think I had a perception of myself just generally, even as a teenager, which was very different to how I began to notice how I was being seen. You know, like, I grew up in Hackney, and I was constantly stopped by police. So there's that one thing. I mean, there's the other thing of at school. I've got a school report that says that the opening paragraph says Raymond is half Jamaican but is not very street. And so I'm like, I remember looking at that and thinking, what is this expectation? And then, even, you know, and it came from everyone, you know, it's not even just like didn't even just come from one demographic of people. It came from everyone, you know, like, you don't sound like you're from Hackney, or you don't sound like you're white, or you don't sound like you're black, and you don't, you know. So there was all these constant noise, and I found poetry and writing a way to just ground me. That's what I was looking for. I think I was looking for grounding. And one of the gifts that I was given by my parents is poetry. They both love poetry. My mom loves William Blake and Adrian Mitchell. My dad loved Miss Lou and Linton Kwesi Johnson. You know, so they kind of gave me this license to experience poetry and to be with poetry.
That's fantastic, and you get a real sense of your family in the book, in the Perseverance. You get a sense of you being accompanied, and in these new poems that you read, also you get a sense of you being accompanied by your wife to that strange setting. But also in the other poem about John, the poem ends and it's kind of like part blessing and part curse, and and I just really love the strange mixture of that, because in a sense you do write about that somewhere on the edge of place, and return to it, that place that can't really be properly defined with one word, Jamaican, what street, that these binary terms are just kind of too lazy and too easy, and they don't really capture anybody's complexity. And it seems to me that in your poetry you're striving, as Jay is striving to capture a kind of a complexity that's not been easily given to us.
Completely. Yeah, completely.
And how did you find writing those new poems, like for Cousin John? Would you agree with that, blessing and curse?
Yeah, completely. The title of this book I'm writing at the moment has changed about 3-4 times. And I had one title with the word between in it, because I realized that every poem is between something, which kind of relates to what Ella was saying about, between land and sea. So even those kind of boundaries, I'd say, are fields to navigate, and navigating them through language is a feat. I'm very inspired by Jay saying that they feel like they're able to embrace and enjoy a process of writing that it's not daunting, and I wish I was there, being able to surf that. But yeah, it's tricky.
It seems like this is a great moment to bring Jay Bernard back into the Zoom room. And Jay shares a lot with you in that they won the Ted Hughes Award for poetry as well, for their wonderful book, Surge, which is a book that retells the horrific and the horrifying story of the New Class fire, but has extraordinary resonances today, not just with Grenfell fire, but with archive, with lost voices, lost stories, lost history. And both of you, it seems to me, are archivists in the sense that you dig up the past and bring it back to the table, and you bring these voices that haven't been heard back into our sound world. Yeah. Well, it's wonderful to have you here. And it's interesting, the two of you knew each other, didn't you, as children, and you were once babysat
You were
by
in
an
not
aunt.
quite. You didn't even speak.
Didn't speak. You didn't actually speak.
No.
We were in the same room as children and didn't even. Yeah. Yeah. It's weird in Hackney.
But it seems to me that you've had interesting parallel lives in terms of your poetry, both winning the same award within a year of each other, 2018, 2019. And it seems strange that even you were in the same room as each other as children. It's a kind of lovely story. Anyway,
I think
welcome.
it was a case of my aunt babysat Ray, and I remember hearing her saying that she did so, but I don't think we ever met.
No, maybe not.
I don't think we were ever in this. I mean, it would be amazing if we weren't. You know what? Like, actually, in the randomness of things, there was probably a party or an event, because my aunt used to have like house, like shindigs and stuff. So it's really possible. But it's so strange. Like, it's that idea of like going back into this kind of rumor, which Ella talked about at the beginning. It's almost like you popped up, Ray, for like 2 minutes in my early childhood, and you went back into this rumored child, you know, who I didn't know. It's weird.
Idea, yeah, it is weird.
And well, Ella's phrase "back into rumor" is so resonant, in the sense that you, Jay, write about rumor and about fact, and you mix the two of them up the whole time. You're a really kind of talented archivist, and you find archives fascinating in themselves, the different voices that emerge, but also the voices that you've made up from, sort of provoked, if you like, rather than inspired by going through those archives. I wonder if you could read us your set, and we'll talk a wee bit about your poetry in a bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to this. And it's been a really interesting conversation. I feel like I've got a lot of things to kind of say about this sort of like coming and going between the land and the sea, and all of that. So I'm going to begin with a poem called Arc, which comes from my book Surge. Arc. Now shall we consult the life of a stranger? Now shall we see what can and cannot be kept? I take this morning from its box, see how the years have warped its edges, its middle pages conjoined at the text. I remove the rusted paperclip, dry sponge its brittle red remains, unfold a liver-spotted note in copper ink, dated by the flaking letraset and amber glue. Press each part to the flatbed scanner, wonder which words to file the damp smoke and young bones under. I sometimes recognize a face from a High 8 film. I'm introduced to she who squatted in the 70s, who made that speech, who remembers 81, when a crowd black as my hand gathered one morning, came over Blackfriars Bridge, were heckled by the press. The year was still fresh, still screaming with its eyes closed. Me brother dead, me brother dead, me brother dead, oh. Me sister dead, me sister dead, me sister dead, oh. A white-sleeved hack hung from the ledge to better spit at some kid who recalls it by their cup of archive wine. I take this January morning in my hands and wonder if it should go under London, England, Britain, British, Black British, where to put the burning house, the child-made ash, the brick in the back of the neck, the shit in the letterbox and the piss up the side of it. I file it under fire, corpus, body, house. It's really interesting what you were saying about rumors and narratives and so on, but also there's this idea of revisiting and sort of recollecting. And I was thinking about the word recover the other day, how if you break it down, it means to cover again, but its actual meaning is to, you know, bring about, which I thought was a really kind of interesting thing. So with this poem, Kitchen, it's this idea of sort of going back and almost re-narrating the kind of the ordinary, the everyday, the quotidian, which is, I think, a really important thing for me. Working in the archives, I'm not trying to write lofty histories. I'm actually trying to almost tell a rumor, tell a story, you know, as if I was talking to a friend or as if I was recounting something, just to pass that information on so everybody knows, and not with any necessarily academic or any of the intentions of a historian, if that makes any sense. So this is Kitchen. I went back to my mother's kitchen. Peas were soaking on the stove and a lettuce was uncurling on the counter. A plastic bag filled with fish was deflating. One of the eyes was pressed against the side, seemed to be the only thing that heard me. This kitchen, the crack in the window, the spice rack with 100 grubby bottles, outside my brother's underwear on the line, a postcard from Auntie in Antigua, a small shelf peopled by Erna Broadbent and Gus John. The door to the bathroom. I know that the floor is coldest by the door. I know what it's like to come in here on a dark morning and turn on the taps and feel the whole house warming up. The gradual breath it takes through the wallpaper, the carpet, the kettle, the Dutch pot, the kippers sparking in oil. I have crept down through the dark, listened to the house, open one red eye and spin it round, then snort, then fall back to sleep. I have held this house in my arms and let it sob on the bathroom floor, heard it in the background of a call, heard it speak a kind of love. I have watched the streetlights shudder through this bathroom window, shake themselves to black and lick the daylight in their fur. The first ray, unencumbered by the clouds, spreads its rose palm against the window. I will be that for my brother and mother. The light touching their faces as she cuts the fish, drains the peas. The next two poems are really works in progress, and I've been thinking a lot about just almost like poems as kind of diaries, you know, just trying to write the kind of immediacy of the experience and not trying to like fix it or make it concrete, but just kind of almost documenting it without trying to shape it necessarily, and then kind of seeing what comes out of that. So two of the poems that came out, these are the next two that I'm gonna read. In the first one, the king expresses his regrets. I wrote on the day that the King of Belgium issued an apology. Well, he didn't issue an apology. He read a statement acknowledging that Belgium had done horrendous things in the Congo, but he didn't in any way name his direct ancestor, King Leopold II. And I thought that evasion was really interesting in what you were saying earlier about a being in the world, a body in the world. There's something resonant to me about the fact that presence, that person who is everywhere, by the way, when you walk around Brussels, it's Leopold this, Leopold that, yet he wasn't invoked. You know, his spirit was kind of left to rest almost, even as they were, you know, pretending to acknowledge this stuff that happened in the Congo, and it really touched me actually, because I remember a couple of years ago, I came across a photograph that I refer to in this poem of a man looking at his child's hand and foot, and it was common practice in the Congo to remove these from you or your family members if you didn't meet your work quota. So there's something about the kind of the body and labor and economics and history that was very haunting to me. So I just kind of like put it down in this first one. It's called The King Expresses His Regrets. Today is the anniversary of Belgium's independence, and we must remember Patrice Lumumba. The king expresses his deepest regrets about what his direct ancestor Leopold II did to the people of Congo, but he didn't apologize. Europe regrets nothing and never will. Israel is about to annex Palestine, report after report about the land being stolen. It will happen tomorrow if tomorrow means today. A friend emails and says there's an uprising in Port of Spain. I Google, 3 men shot dead, and last Friday, a 2-year-old murdered along with her father, Anya. You know, for most of us, regret eats us up. We regret being ourselves because of what happens to us. I didn't want to think about Leopold or the photos of a boy with a hand in the hand of a man dressed in white, pointing a warning finger at us, and the boy's face, his stare, his stump an act of charity. Those concerned for Africa's future donated to the International African Association, a humanitarian mission to open to civilization the only part of our globe which is not yet penetrated, to pierce the darkness that hangs over entire peoples is, I dare say, a crusade worthy of this century of progress. I have tried not to think about Leopold. I have tried not to walk down the long street that bears his name, that boy's face and his stare. And Unsala, a farmer, named, who sits looking at his daughter's hand and foot. He did not meet his quota, so her life, as well as that of his wife, were taken. What I notice is the unease of being and not wanting to be. This phenomenon of life feels incongruent with the world. How to be when you know that what you walk on isn't earth, but the boy's hand, the woman's hand. This second poem is called Sylvia Pankhurst is Buried in Ethiopia, which is something I didn't know, and I've been researching the 1980s. It's a you know an era that's really important to me, and I think about it a lot. And I'm kind of revisiting some of the issues and some of the big sort of political tides that were happening in the 1980s, and I came across this fact really that kind of like became became a poem. So this is called Sylvia Pankhurst is Buried in Ethiopia. Researching women in politics in the early 1980s, I come across Leslie Abdallah talking about the 300 Club and getting more women in parliament. She says towards the end that she happened to be in Ethiopia in 1997 during the election when Labour presented its all-women shortlist. She said she wanted to visit Sylvia Pankhurst's grave and lay a flower there. It's not so much Pankhurst or Abdallah as the thought of Haile Selassie riding a lion, earthly king, Jamaican deity, and warbling name on a dub plate, calling her an honorary Ethiopian that causes pause. I too would like to lay a flower there, on the land I have heard of, in service of this poem, in service of the time my heart belongs to. Why have I not been before, and yet read of Italy invading in the 30s, yet read of Selassie's arrival in Kingston, yet danced with an Ethiopian woman from Sweden, and compared and contrasted our versions of black? I am jealous that Pankhurst is there and I have never been. And having seen Lenin's grave but never Marx or Jones, having seen Plath's grave but never returning to my uncle's headstone, what is the pull to far away that makes it so comparably light to the weight of a flower laid near? Speaking of flowers, I'm going to end on a poem called Flowers, which is also the end of my book, Surge. Flowers. Will anybody speak of this the way the flowers do, the way the common speaks of the fearless dying leaves? Will anybody speak of this the way the common does, the way the fearless dying leaves speak of the coming cold? Will anybody speak of this the way the fearless dying leaves speak of the coming cold and the quiet it will bring? Will anybody speak of this, the coming of the cold, the quiet it will bring, the fire we beheld? Will anybody speak of this, the quiet it will bring, the fire we beheld, the garlands at the gate? Will anybody speak of this, the fire we beheld, the garlands at the gate, the way the flowers do? Thank you very much.
Wow, that was fantastic, and there's so many ideas in that reading that make me continue really the conversation that we've been having already. That idea of what is the pull of the far away. It strikes me you're extraordinary for a young writer in the fact that you've taken the 1980s as your territory, if you like, your poetic territory, and you've made it your own, and you've inhabited that time in a way that makes us feel like we are back in it then, but we're also now, in that sense, in the way that I was talking to Ella about earlier with mythology, that sense that we exist simultaneously in then and now, and people tend to separate the two, but in your work they're not really separate at all. One fire sparks off and reminds you horribly of another, and the ways that the dead return in Surge, and the voices that you give them, the pull towards them is endlessly and miraculously done.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something about a kind of desire for time travel turned into a sort of poetics, really, and also this question of like why, feeling like I sort of belong to another era in a way. I really love the internet, and I love MacBooks, and I love all of the trappings of, you know, being a child born in the late 80s, but there's something about the kind of the sort of material sort of reality of the 80s, and the fact that so much of what I am was forged there. It's almost like trying to get backwards into a kind of origin myth for me. When I think about it, I don't know if I would want to have experienced any time in history before the 80s. I feel sort of terrified of those times, and yet there's something about this period that I know you shaped that period, like so many like interesting writers that I really love and still know and talk to shape this time, and sometimes it feels like I wanted to have been there in that room, you know, walking around Brixton in Doc Martens and, you know, like bashing the fash kind of thing. And I know that's a glamorization, but it's also a kind of way of moving forward, to be honest with you, in a way of having sort of hope and life. I find that without this tethering to the past, I struggle to feel particularly present, actually. So
I find that really fascinating, that without this tethering to the past, you struggle to feel particularly present. Why do you think that is in yourself? Do you think that relates to your own childhood in some way, or do you think that relates to the way that you've become a writer, or what do you think that's to do with?
yeah, I think it's to do with just sort of like, yeah, feeling. I mean, I definitely grew up as a kind of, you know, an outsider as a kid, and I think it's super interesting what Ray was saying about learning emotional literacy, learning about shame, for example, shame and anger. These are feelings that come from your environment. They're not feelings that are to do with you or your body necessarily, and yet we never learn that, and it's kind of twas ever thus, you know what I'm saying? Like I meet younger people now who have exactly the same you know, strange feelings of dislocation or otherness, you know, and what cure is there for it other than writing, really? Writing for me was definitely a way of being in the world. Actually, it was a way of communicating, it was a way of having ideas, it was a way of actually gaining love, if I'm completely honest with you. Like when I was a small kid, I actually think writing was a way of like engaging with people and sharing my ideas in a way that I couldn't in a more kind of direct way. So that was fascinating. But I think maybe now there's something about that never goes away. And I'm finding that I'm at the age now where things are kind of going in a loop, where I'm out of date, where I'm a little bit out of fashion and out of step. You know, like I'm here with like a 17-year-old, and I just feel how like creaking and like, you know, like a kind of a bit of a dinosaur I am. And I come from this like whole other era, and I really feel it. And it's not a bad thing at all. In fact, it's incredibly precious to me, because to me that is that's memory, and that's having a kind of residual kind of understanding of a different world, you know. And once you've experienced a different world, you know that the world can change. And I guess in my writing, that's coming off as documenting my reading, right? So in both poems, it's really about what I'm reading and how I'm kind of like thinking about that, and how I'm kind of turning that into a sort of meditation on the past or the present or even the future. That I think is just a kind of development of that very early impulse as a 7-year-old to sort of sit and write and share and engage with this present moment without having necessarily the tools taught to me by, you know, the adults around me about how to do that in any other way.
It's amazing, because I actually first met you in your school in Islington, and you were 16 years old. I remember actually, you know, I was a visiting poet and sharing the stage with you, and just how striking you were. You still are, but it's interesting to me that 16-year-old or 17-year-old seems so far away to you now, and it's hilarious in a way, you know, for me, the age I am, to hear you kind of talk almost as if you're past it in some way. And it's interesting when my son described that, about being in his early 30s as being a very, very different experience to being in your 20s, but you completely forget that when you're in your 50s or 60s. It seems like an extraordinary luxury. So time is so subjective and so particular, and one of the reasons that I put all of you together, you know, Ella and Ray and yourself together, is because you seem to me like old souls in some way. You connect to the past in an exceptional way, as well as very, very much rooted in the present. And this seems a really good time to bring Claire Brown back, because Claire's picked a song that relates to the past, to the music hall, and really to your poem Flowers in particular. Claire, can you tell us a little bit about your choice?
Yeah, Jay, it was just your response. I read an article that you wrote about flowers and surge, and it was just one line that just completely struck me, and it was institutional indifference to the working class, and it just like I just completely like it talk about emotional literacy, that that I just completely understood something, and you were so eloquent with the way that you wrote that, and and talking about past, present and future. It's funny, I'm in my early 40s. I think there might be 10 years between us, and I'm sort of now going, yeah, it's all right actually. I don't feel like, kind of don't feel past it. I sort of feel like I've got this like sort of body of like stuff now, and I'll just move forward with that. But it's that the reason I've chosen this music hall song, She Was Poor But She Was Honest. It's the recurring chorus that you'll hear is it's the same world the whole world over. It's the poor what gets the blame, and it's never been any different. I hope it will be different, but here we are again, and what you've, I'm sorry, that's my toddler in the background, what you've written about with the new Crossfire and then Grenfell. It's like, well, here we are again, and when is this going to change? But it and it goes all the way. I mean, this song was written in the 1800s, I think. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, great. Take it away, Claire.
Okay. She was poor, but she was honest, victim of some fella's game. First he loved her, then he left her. Ain't it all a bleeding shame? It's the same the whole world over. It's the poor what gets the blame. It's the rich what gets the pleasure. Ain't it all a bleeding shame? Then she ran away to London for to hide her grief and shame, where she met another fella and she lost her name again. It's the same the whole world over. It's the poor what gets the blame. It's the rich what gets the pleasure. Ain't it all a bleeding shame? See her riding in a carriage in the park, and all so gay. All the nibs and nobby persons come to pass the time of day. It's the same the whole world over. It's the poor what gets the blame. It's the rich what gets the pleasure. Ain't it all a bleeding shame? See him in the House of Commons, making laws to put down crime, while the victim of his passions trials her way through mud and slime. It's the same the whole world over. It's the poor what gets the blame. It's the rich what gets the pleasure. Ain't it all a bleeding shame? Standing on the bridge at midnight, she cries, farewell, blighted love. There's a scream, a splash, good heavens, what is she a doing of? It's the same the whole world over. It's the poor what gets the blame. It's the rich what gets the pleasure. Ain't it all a bleeding shame? Then they dragged her from the river, water from her clothes they wrang, for they thought that she was drowned. But the corpse got up and sang, it's the same the whole world over. It's the poor what gets the blame. It's the rich what gets the pleasure. I need all the bleeding shame.
Fantastic.
Oh, that's great. I love that.
That's,
I love that
yeah.
that's what you got out of that.
Yeah, that's
Institutional
fantastic.
indifference.
And that song also contains this miraculous returning, this strange transformation, this coming back from the dead, which has
Yeah.
been, if you like, our loose theme of tonight. Strange translations from mythology, from the actual history that we've lived through, from the recent past and from the distant past, the way that life returns to us, and the strange echoes that we find in things. So I'd like to thank very, very much and bring back into the Zoom room Ella Duffy.
Hello, I'm back.
Hello, and Raymond Antrobus. What did you both make of that song?
Brilliant. Again, another haunting one.
Yeah. And what about you, Ray?
Yeah, no, visceral, brilliant. Theatrical, but also this, we were all talking about bodies and the kind of rising of those bodies and how they sing, how they speak, how they live with us. So I thought it was a good choice.
Yeah, fantastic.
I was just gonna say I really loved it because first of all, the idea that the corpse singing, I love that. Yeah. But one of my favorite songs is Joe Hill, the classic song, and it's the same thing, like I never died, says he, I never died, says he. That's the refrain out over and over again, and it begins with, I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night. So it seems like there is this kind of like thread actually in sort of popular culture and kind of poetry and everything, this return of the dead.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was wonderful. Paul Robeson sang that song so magnificently. Yeah. I dreamed I saw Joe Hill, and it's a song that's often sung at people, socialists and communist funerals, and every single time that I hear it at a funeral, it makes me cry. But it reminds me of the importance of resistance, of finding your own singular voice, and of speaking out. And everybody tonight has speak in their own inimitable voice, and it's been really, really fantastic having you all on Makar to Makar. So thank you very much, each and every one of you, for joining us. This has been a vintage triple-decker Makar to Makar. So exciting to be here. And so exciting to have you all. I wonder if you would tell us, Ella, first, what your favourite independent bookshop is, please.
Yeah, so mine is Gaze the Word in London. I first read about it when I was a teenager, probably 14 or 15, desperately wanted to go. And it's a really, really important space. And I think every town, every city needs at least one queer bookshop, dozens of queer bookshops. So it's a really, it's a great one. Gaze the Word.
Right, fantastic choice. I love Gaze Word as well, really, and it's been going for so many years and been such a comfort for so many years, such a space for people to congregate, because the independent bookshop has often taken the place of community in small towns, where you can actually go to a place and belong in a way that you might not belong anywhere else up until the point when you first found Gaze Word or Sister Right, Silver Moon Compendium. Yes, and Jay, could you tell us?
My favourite bookshop. Yeah, I really like Bookmongers in Brixton. I've been going there as well since I was a sort of early teenager. When I was about 15, I got my first summer free of having to, you know, of any particular obligation or childcare or whatever. So I used to walk around Brixton, and Bookmongers was one of those places where I found a lot of weird stuff that just sort of like opened my mind up to other ideas, other writers, other places, other worlds. And it's one of those like super old school secondhand bookshops where you can kind of bring a load in and you know, you sell it off for like 20 quid or whatever, but you can also just rummage and it's just piles and there's dust, and there's a little dog, and it's just, you know, it's just like none of the sort of mochas and cacti. It's very much like you come in and you find a gem, that kind of thing.
Great, thank you. And Ray.
Yeah, just to say that those are two great bookshops. I'm gonna represent and I'm gonna big up Burley Fisher, which is a independent bookshop in Dalston, and it's now the only bookshop on in pretty much in Dalston at the moment. When I was growing up, you know, late 80s, 90s, there was a bookshop and community centre called Centerprise, which my mum used to take me to, and so many books were launched there. I'm sure, Jackie, you probably were there at some point, and that closed down. And talking about bookshops and community, with the closing of Centerprise, I really remember feeling that absence. And there was my first places where I used to find books was actually the Oxfam shop, which in Dalston, the big one. So the Burley Fisher, which is open now, is you know, it's only about I don't know 20 yards away from that Oxfam shop where I first was, you know, picking up books, going in there, finding them cheap, finding them secondhand. And the great thing about Burley Fisher is that I think they are very much kind of community orientated. They try and do readings, they try and bring authors into the bookshop, into the space. They do workshops, book launches, and I feel that that's so important for a bookshop to do, to include a community and bring it and uphold it with it and its history.
Yeah, absolutely. And every week also on Makar to Makar, we have one of the Makars introduced who next week's Makar going to be. So that task falls to you, Ella, this week.
Yeah. So next week's Makar is Peggy Seeger.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely, yeah, Peggy Seeger. So we're so excited about having Peggy Seeger on Makar to Makar. Many of you will know and love her songs and have been following her career for years, and she's just a fantastic person. So I'm really looking forward to talking with her. I've had a fantastic time talking to all of you tonight. This programme has been made possible with the help and the support of the National Theatre of Scotland, who are hosting this on their YouTube channel, of Edinburgh International Book Festival, of the School of Arts and Media at Salford University, and of Home Manchester. So thank you all very, very much for your support. It's made this series possible. And thank you once again to the fantastic Ella Duffy, Raymond Antrobus, Jay Bernard, and Claire Brown. That's been the 12th edition of Makar to Makar. See you next week for the 13th. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.